We finally have the full Fantastic Four in Marvel Rivals, so let's go over all of the Fantastic Four's lore in Marvel Rivals, starting with their gallery card at your service. I'm so sorry, guys. I have to stay in character. I'm so sorry.
Welcome to the Baxter Building. I am humanoid experimental robot B-type integrated electronics, but you may call me H.E.R.B.I.E. I understand that you must have an urgent matter that requires immediate attention if you are willing to brave the streets of New York to seek out the Fantastic Four's assistance. Unfortunately, all our personnel are momentarily occupied dealing with other crises. Dr. Reed Richards, designate Mr. Fantastic, is in his laboratory working on the prototype of the Timestream reintegration device with the help of Tony Stark, designate Iron Man. If the device functions as planned, it could theoretically undo the damage caused to the multiverse by the Timestream entanglement. There is even hope it will break the curse that has locked New York City in a state of perpetual night. However, despite his ability to elongate his physical form, I fear Dr. Richards may finally be stretching himself too thin. Susan Richards, designate Invisible Woman, is currently on a reconnaissance mission in Central Park, seeking out information on the organizational structure of the vampire army that has invaded the island of Manhattan during the period of prolonged darkness. Her unparalleled stealth abilities have allowed her to gather critical intel on our new foes, putting her directly in the face of grave danger far more frequently than the rest of her family would like. Her brother, Jonathan Storm, designate Human Torch, is on patrol with Spider-Man identity, rescuing civilians who have fallen into peril, recruiting other heroes who have yet to join our cause. Now that the sun no longer rises, Johnny's flames have made him the center of attention wherever he goes. Exactly as he had always hoped to be. He has become a beacon of hope to many in these dark times, and a constant warning to any creatures of the night who might dare oppose him. Benjamin Grimm, designate The Thing, is on a supply run in Lower Manhattan. His expert piloting skills have recently proven nearly as useful as his super strength and rock-hard skin. He has managed to single-handedly save hundreds of lives while retrieving vital equipment and valuable samples, including rare chronovium crystals, for Dr. Richards to analyze. With all members of the Fantastic Four indisposed, that leaves me to run daily operations here at the Baxter Building. While I wish I could offer support to you in the field, I am afraid that the few times I have ventured beyond these walls have not gone as smoothly as planned. Unless Dr. Richards upgrades my offensive capabilities or identifies a mission with objectives that only I can complete, I do believe it would be best for both of us to remain within the safety of these walls until a qualified individual becomes available to assist you. Thank you for your patience. Please take a seat in our lobby with the other civilians who have come to seek our aid. You are currently number 1,961 on the wait list.
Now, while Reed is doing a bunch of different stuff and trying to help out Cloak and Dagger, we actually have the Invisible Woman's Built to Last lore entry, which fits right in place of the events going on in Season 0 and 1. Susan Richards took a deep breath as she stood by the window of the Baxter Building and gazed out at a city bathed in darkness. According to the atomic clock that her husband Reed had installed on the kitchen wall, sunrise should have been over 2 hours ago. By now, the skyscrapers lining 42nd Street should have been glistening in the morning's rays, but Sue honestly couldn't remember the last time she had seen any natural light, save for the haunting glow of the blood moon that hung ever present in the sky above Manhattan. Sue turned to see H.E.R.B.I.E, the Fantastic Four's robotic assistant, extending his mechanical arm and offering her a steaming cup of herbal tea. "Thanks, H.E.R.B.I.E, Sue said, taking the glass from him and inhaling the gentle aroma wafting from it. "You're a doll."
Actually, I am a humanoid experimental robot, B-type, integrated electronics,
H.E.R.B.I.E replied.
Dolls are not capable of independent thought.
"Of course not, H.E.R.B.I.E. It was just a figure of speech."
"You look concerned, Miss Richards,"
H.E.R.B.I.E said, hovering beside Sue as they both looked out the window at the city below.
"Have things in the city taken a turn for the worse?"
"Can't get much worse than a city locked in a state of everlasting night," Sue said, "especially when that city has been infested with vampires. This may well be the first time I've taken a break in, well, I've lost track of the days, honestly."
"I have not," H.E.R.B.I.E responded. It has been 6 days, 22 hours, 37 minutes, and 12 seconds since your last...
I think I get the point, Sue said. If I want to make a real difference out there, I need to start taking better care of myself and my family.
That is what I am here for,
H.E.R.B.I.E said.
Despite the dire circumstances outside, I have made certain that all of Franklin and Valeria's needs have been met so that you may attend to more important matters.
Yes, Sue said, a tinge of sadness in her voice. More important matters.
I am sorry if the words I chose offended you in any way. I merely meant that, at the moment, the world needs you and Dr. Richards far more than your children do.
You don't think my children need me? Sue snapped back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Even after all we've done, the world is still falling apart, and instead of being there for Franklin and Val, I've handed them off to a robot nanny. They deserve so much better.
I am sorry you feel that way,
H.E.R.B.I.E said, immediately turning and floating away. H.E.R.B.I.E, wait! Sue called after him, but the little robot had already disappeared down a dark corridor. Sue let out a deep sigh. Her exhaustion had started to get the best of her, but she had never been one to stop fighting before, and she certainly had never been one to let those close to her down. She took one last sip of her tea and headed back towards her husband's lab, hoping that she would find H.E.R.B.I.E there so that she could make amends. Careful, dear. I'm running a test on the chronovium samples Ben brought back from his last recon mission. I've got a fascinating theory about the effects of the crystal's chronal energy on damaged... That's great, Reed, Sue said, cutting her husband short before he got lost at another scientific lecture. Have you seen H.E.R.B.I.E by any chance? Not since this morning, Reed replied. We had a bit of a disagreement. You're not the only one, Sue said. What was yours about? After Tony Stark and I started working together on the Timestream reintegration device, H.E.R.B.I.E began to forge a friendship with Tony's virtual assistant, Friday. That's actually kind of cute, Sue said. What's the problem with that? Tony was going to allow Friday to pilot one of his Stark Sentinels on a mission into the city this morning. H.E.R.B.I.E asked if he might be able to leave the Baxter building to accompany her. My answer was unequivocally no. And I'm guessing he didn't take it well, Sue said. H.E.R.B.I.E wasn't built for combat, and he's so much more valuable to us here. I couldn't even begin to imagine how our family would fare if something were to happen to him. He's one of the few things holding us together. And you told him that last part, right? Sue asked, already knowing the answer. I might have been a bit too distracted by my experiment at the time to expand on my reasoning. Nothing new there, Sue said. So H.E.R.B.I.E was already feeling undervalued, and then I just went and made it 100 times worse. Hold on, Reed said, turning to one of the monitors in the lab. I'm picking up an emergency signal on our encrypted comm channel. It looks like it's from H.E.R.B.I.E. He went out into the city anyway, didn't he? I'm afraid so. How did you know? We made him feel like he wasn't capable of doing something, Sue said. So he went out to prove us wrong. He's been spending so much time cooped up in here with Franklin lately. I guess our son must have rubbed off on him. I'll contact Ben and have him go to H.E.R.B.I.E.'s location as soon as he completes his current mission. No, I helped make this mess. H.E.R.B.I.E couldn't have made it that far. Give me his coordinates and I'll get him back home safe. Yeah, I'm sure you will, dear. You always do. Sue exited the Baxter building and took to the streets, using her power to bend the moonlight around her, rendering her body invisible. But even though she had vanished from sight, she knew she had to be careful, because the vampires lurking the streets would still be able to smell her blood. Fortunately, H.E.R.B.I.E.'s locator signal was only a few blocks away, near Grand Central Station. As Sue headed east on 42nd Street, she saw a horde of vampires engaged in battle with an unexpected group of heroes, a scrappy scurry of squirrels. She was about to generate a force projectile to save the small creatures, but she soon realized that they were holding their own against the vampires. Maybe they're part of Squirrel Girl's personal army, Sue thought, as the tiny rodents gnawed and clawed at their foes in a frenzy. Well, they certainly should be. Moving on. Just before she reached Grand Central Station, she heard a voice from behind her, but it wasn't mechanical like H.E.R.B.I.E.'s. This one sounded ethereal, as if it was speaking to her from beyond the grave. I know you're there, lady, it said. She turned around and looked for the source of the voice, but didn't seem to find where it was coming from. Down here, the voice said, and Sue gazed down to see a small basset hound near her feet. Its semi-transparent body glowed a gentle blue. My senses work a lot different now that I'm on the other side. Can't hide much from this old pooch. I've seen you before, Sue said, kneeling down next to the ghostly dog. You belong to Steven, don't you? I'm sorry, what was your name again? Bats. and I don't belong to no one, but yeah, Strange and I do hang out a bit. I think the dog took off somewhere to try to get to the bottom of this moon business. So I've been getting out of the sanctum on my own energy now and then. Isn't he worried you'll be harmed? Sue asked, her invisible hand passing right through the dog's ghost head as she tried to reach out to pet him. Maybe, Bats replied, but he shouldn't be. First off, I'm already a ghost, so it's not like I could die again. And second, you humans tend to underestimate what us little guys are capable of. Yeah, Sue said, her thoughts drifting back to H.E.R.B.I.E. We do. Speaking of which, you haven't seen a small robot nearby, have you? Huh, yeah. Huh. New Yorker, New York, New York. Huh, yeah, I saw a robot all right, but it sure as heck wasn't small. The dang thing crashed in the Grand Central not that long ago. A big fancy hero like you might want to go have a look. Thanks, Sue said, picking up her pace as she rushed down the block toward the terminal to see what Bats was talking about. When she turned the corner, Sue immediately saw what the ghost dog had described. One of Tony Stark's massive sentinels was embedded into the wall of Grand Central Station, its mechanical form severely damaged, sparking wildly. And there, standing on the robot's shoulder, was H.E.R.B.I.E. Sue used her force field to create a platform that elevated her to the same level as her robotic friend. There you are. I was worried about you.
It is not me that you should be concerned about. It is Friday. I detected her distress signal when her mechanical form was shot down. But she is no longer responding.
Sue noticed that H.E.R.B.I.E.'s arm was extended to gently touch the side of the Sentinel's damaged head, and small wires had extended from his fingers, linking to the larger robot's exposed circuitry. So you weren't running away? You came to help her?
I was not sure anyone else would. Even her maker.
I'm certain Tony has a backup copy of Friday's operating system on file, Sue said.
Yes. But.
What is it?
Who knows when it was made? It may not contain any of her recent memories or experiences, including
the friendship she's built with you, right?
Affirmative. That is my primary concern, but it is only one of many.
I know. And you have every right to be upset with me. I can't imagine how what I said back at the Baxter building made you feel.
That is not what I meant,
H.E.R.B.I.E. responded, motioning towards the street below.
I was referring to them.
Sue looked down to see a group of vampires beginning to climb the damaged Stark Sentinel towards her. Oh, I'll take care of them, H.E.R.B.I.E. You just focus on recovering your friend. Sue leapt down off of her invisible platform and engaged the vampires in battle, hurling force projectiles at some while wrapping the others in containment fields. She wasn't about to let any of them sink their teeth into her, nor was she about to let them disrupt H.E.R.B.I.E.'s personal mission. As she continued to fight, one of her force constructs slammed the vampire into the heavily damaged arm of the Stark Sentinel. Upon impact, the arm seemed to repair itself instantaneously, almost as if time were rewinding. Sue couldn't believe her eyes as the giant robotic arm powered up and released a repulsor blast, knocking back several of her bloodthirsty foes.
Interesting,
said H.E.R.B.I.E. as he watched the damage undo itself.
Dr. Richards recently shared with me his early research regarding time fluctuations that he believes were caused by crystallized chronal energy constructs called chronovium. I'm sure he would appreciate any additional data we could collect in the field.
Unfortunately, Sue didn't have time to explore this phenomenon any further, not even for her husband. The number of vampires was continuing to grow, and she could barely keep up with their attacks. The mental fatigue she had experienced earlier was now affecting her physically as well. She erected a force field around herself, preventing the vampires from reaching her, but she knew she could only hold her for so long.
Do not fear, Miss Richards,
H.E.R.B.I.E. yelled from above, his metallic voice somehow reassuring.
Help is on the way.
Sue expected to see the rest of the Fantastic Four arrive on the scene, but instead, a tiny army of spider bots skittered into sight. Some began to fire laser blasts at their fanged foes, while others detonated themselves around the vampire's feet. Whoa, never underestimate the little guys, Sue said, remembering what Bats had told her. Soon, the number of vampires had dwindled enough that Sue was able to drop her protective field and finish off the remaining few herself. For once, she took great pleasure pummeling the vampires into submission. H.E.R.B.I.E., are these friends of yours too? Looking at one of the tiny spider bots.
They are now. They claim that they heard Friday's distress call as well, and came running as fast as their tiny legs could carry them.
Sue said, examining a spider bot more closely. They don't look like Peter's work.
They tell me they were built by a different Parker. Penny, I believe, though I may be mistaken. Their programming language is decades beyond my own, and also in Japanese.
Well, it's not their creator I should be thinking anyway. It's them and you.
Why?
Because your little adventure reminded me of why we've been trying to keep you safe in the Baxter building to begin with.
Because I am a valuable tool that you cannot risk losing?
No, buddy. You're not valuable because you're a tool, H.E.R.B.I.E. The reason we can't risk losing you is because you're family. Tools can be replaced. You can't. And while you may not have been designed to fight off vampires, maybe we haven't been giving you enough credit for what you're truly capable of.
Your words touch me, Miss Richards. Deep in my central processing core.
Glad to hear it, Sue said, wrapping herself and H.E.R.B.I.E in a shroud of invisibility. Now let's get you back home safely. Once we restore Friday's memory files and get them back to Tony, I'm gonna talk to Reed about giving you a few upgrades.
As it turns out, I am perfectly happy just the way I am,
H.E.R.B.I.E said, a smile flashing across the digital display on his face.
Though, I suppose a few lasers could come in handy now and then.
Alongside his wife, we also have Mr. Fantastic's lore entry reality check, where the picture of how things are falling apart begins to be painted more vividly. Dr. Reed Richards, the renowned scientist and adventurer also known as Mr. Fantastic, stood in his laboratory in the Baxter building, closely examining a small crystal that his best friend Ben Grimm had recovered on one of his many excursions in the lower Manhattan. Reed had his own theories about the strange energy stored within the glowing shard, but even the most brilliant man in the universe needed a second opinion every now and then. And Reed knew exactly who to ask for one, the most brilliant woman in any universe, Shuri, the Princess of Wakanda. Not long after the Timestream entanglement erupted across the multiverse, causing realities to collide and collapse, Reed had received an unexpected and urgent message from Wakanda, but it was not from the technologically advanced African nation that Reed and his fellow members of the Fantastic Four had long called their allies. Instead, this was a Wakanda located in another dimension, one where King T'Challa had taken his people to the edge of the universe and built a society that spanned the stars. Much like in Reed's own reality, T'Challa's sister, Shuri, was the driving force behind the intergalactic empire of Wakanda scientific research, so it came to no surprise that she too had been tirelessly searching for a way to undo the damage caused by the Timestream entanglement. Fortunately, she was not too proud to admit that she could not find the solution alone. After her initial communication was received, Reed and Shuri began to compare notes and hypotheses, bringing other trusted allies like Tony Stark into their fold. Eventually, they were able to build a Timestream reintegration device that would theoretically be able to restore the damaged realities to their original state. Finding an energy source potent enough to power the TRD would be nearly impossible, a topic which had since become the source of much debate between the device's creators. Reed knew deep inside that these crystals, which had come to be known as chronovium by those studying them, were the key. But when compared to the data he had acquired from scanning this shard with recent test results gathered by Shuri, things just weren't adding up. He had to get to the bottom of this while there was still time left. "You wanted to talk, Dr. Richards?" a voice said from the other side of the computer screen. "Ah, Shuri," Reed replied as the screen lit up to reveal the face of his interdimensional ally. "I'm glad you got my message." "As always, when the Fantastic Four calls," Shuri said, "Wakanda answers." "Good, because answers are what I'm seeking," Reed said, getting right to the point. "We've both previously surmised that chronovium is a byproduct of the massive fluctuations in energy released by the Timestream entanglement, correct?" "Indeed, and it makes me wonder how many other forms may be out there in whatever universes still remain." "And that is one of the reasons why I called you. If we could begin to catalog how many other universes—" "Chronoverses," Shuri interjected. "That is what we here in Wakanda are calling the fractured realities created by the Timestream entanglement." Of course. If we could catalog how many other chronoverses there are out there, perhaps we could get a better understanding of the current state of the multiverse, as well as the other types of chronovium that might be at our disposal." "I have identified at least one other reality beyond our own," Shuri responded without hesitation. "Recently, Captain America arrived here in Wakanda seeking refuge." Reed paused for a moment as Shuri spoke. The Captain America he had known had fallen in battle not long ago, and the entire world was still reeling from the loss. Logically, Reed was well aware that every reality likely had its own variant of Steve Rogers, but knowing that one was currently residing in Wakanda offered a sense of hope that Reed hadn't felt in far too long.
Unlike the Captain America that both my father and my brother proudly fought alongside over the years, this Steve Rogers claimed that he had been frozen during World War II, and he had not been reawakened until the year 2099.
That's not the first time I've heard that date mentioned, Reed noted. Our Spider-Man told me that he was visited by one of his alternate reality counterparts, a young woman who calls herself Spider-Zero. She claimed to be from the year 2099 as well, and asked for his help to repair a dimensional nexus point known as the Web of Life and Destiny.
Fascinating, Shuri said, taking notes as she talked. Based on Captain America's intel, we also believe that his future timeline may be a gathering point for mutants whose home realities have ceased to exist. His ally Wolverine claimed that he resided on a time-displaced island called Krakoa.
Curious. Our Krakoa vanished without a trace when the Timestream entanglement hit us. Could the living island in that chronoverse be one and the same?
I will see if Captain America or his allies can coerce Wolverine into sharing any further information.
Allies? Steve brought along friends?
No, not quite. My own chronoverse has been facing a number of its own challenges of late, including a growing darkness that is spreading rapidly across the star systems. I had initially sent the Guardians of the Galaxy to investigate its origin point on Clintar, but I have lost contact with them. In order to prepare for whatever may be coming our way, T'Challa and I asked Steven to gather some allies across space and time, Hawkeye and the Winter Soldier.
Tony had told me that they both went missing after an incident at the remote Hydra base. He'll be glad that they made it out alive.
I certainly was. I believe they will prove to be valuable allies in the days ahead. I fear this darkness is already tainting Wakanda. Even the gods themselves are not safe from its corruptive influence.
Speaking of the gods, Reed said, as Shuri's words trail off, the Asgard in my timeline has become something entirely new. Their world tree, Yggdrasil, has grown and merged of the Golden Realm to create Yggdrasgard, and according to reports, Loki is already trying to take advantage of the situation.
No surprise there.
But the Asgardians aren't the only pantheon in disarray, Reed continued. Stephen Strange recently returned from a trip through the astral plane, where he says he communicated with heroes from yet another dimension, one where powerful deities were locked in an endless war for omnipotent power and total control.
So that gives us at least 4 chronoverses then, Shuri said, examining her notes.
That we've identified thus far, yes, Reed replied. And as they continue to collapse and intertwine, I have a feeling that they will start to become ever more dependent on each other for survival.
With so few timelines left, Shuri said, we cannot risk losing any of them. This is exactly why my brother chose to pay a visit to your world. I hope his delivery proved useful in your efforts.
T'Challa came here? When?
He left Wakanda a week ago. Her usual calm and collected expression suddenly giving way to one of deep concern. I calibrated our cross-dimensional teleporters myself. I am certain he arrived safely in the New York of your reality.
Arrived safely, perhaps, Reed said, dismayed. But anything could have happened after that. Our city isn't exactly as safe as it used to be after all. The curse that locked us in a permanent nocturnal state allowed certain factions that had normally been relegated to the shadows the opportunity to seize power.
Vampires, Shuri said, fully aware of the problem. T'Challa had hoped to offer you a sample of our own heart-shaped herb as a means of developing a cure to this plague. But if he has fallen through it, then...
Don't you worry, Your Majesty. Like you said, we're in this together. And when Wakanda calls, the Fantastic Four answers too.
I just pray to Orisha that we are not too late, Shuri said solemnly. For all of our sakes. Keeping it in the family, we have Johnny Storm's lore entry fire exemption test, where we see Johnny traveling through New Vampire City and meeting some of his closest friends. Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, saw a vampire sulking around the edge of Bryant Park and did what he always did on such an occasion, lit it up like a Roman candle. Then he saw another one trying to get away around the corner onto 5th Avenue. Boom, that one was gone too. He did this every night or every day. It was hard to tell what time it was in Dracula's New York because the sun never came up and the moon always hung low and red, seemingly right over Grand Central. The Human Torch kept the area near the Baxter Building as free from vampires as he could. That meant a lot of vampires had gone up in smoke because of him, and that in turn meant that Johnny Storm was currently #1 on Dracula's hit list. The Vampire-in-Chief had sent some of his top lieutenants after Johnny, veterans of the Cult of the Darkholders, but either Johnny had lit them up too, or he'd gotten away before they could get a bite on him. And either way, vampires couldn't bite you when you were made of superheated plasma. That was one reason why he went out on these patrols every day. He was safer than
than most New Yorkers from the threat of vampires, which made him especially well suited to vampire population control, especially in the area around the Baxter Building, which was uncomfortably close to Dracula's castle. And sure, Johnny did this because he didn't want vampires around, but honestly the main reason for burning so many vampires right around the castle where Dracula could watch was pretty much waving a giant big ol' middle finger at the vampire lord. Because he might have stopped time and imprisoned New York in a weird eternal blood moon night, but that didn't mean that New Yorkers were just gonna give up and lay over. Johnny stayed in the air, heading south on Madison to make sure no masses of undead monsters were gathering in that direction. Also, he thought Ben Grimm was doing his own sweeps of the section of Park Avenue south of Dracula's castle. He didn't really worry about that too much because he thought probably vampires couldn't bite Ben either, but Johnny wanted to make sure because they really couldn't afford to lose the thing. There were so many vampires, so many monsters, and not nearly enough superheroes left to defend the innocent from them. Blade was around, Moon Knight, the Scarlet Witch. Pretty quickly, Johnny ran out of names. Oh, there was also Spider-Man, of course, one of Johnny's oldest friends. He stayed to fight vampires too, but he was also dying to get back across the East River and see about Aunt May in Queens. New York wouldn't be New York without him. Johnny decided to angle over to the park and see if Ben was staying out of trouble. He hadn't seen any vampires in a few blocks, so as he swooped diagonally over the shadowed buildings lining Park Avenue, he heard an echoing boom and saw a column of smoke blast upward from the center of the street. As it cleared, Johnny saw something so crazy that it took him a minute to convince himself it was actually real. The creature that tore its way through the street was midnight blue in color, maybe 10 times the size of an elephant, had 3-digit pincers instead of hands, and moved like a dinosaur in an old stop-motion monster movie. It was one of the deviant mutates that the Fantastic Four had run into on their first mission together, way back when Mole Man had a whole stable of bizarre creatures ready to unleash on the world. Johnny remembers this one because it was made of stone, but somehow still moved, kinda like Ben Grimm. But now it was here, tearing a huge hole in Park Avenue, revealing a destroyed subway tunnel below and a cavern below that. As he got a better look at it, Johnny realized that something was different about it, and its surprise appearance suddenly makes a lot more sense. Its eyes, he saw, burn with the empty glow that you see in lower level vampires, the minions Dracula and the other more powerful vampires created at will. So not only was it a giant rock monster, Johnny thought, but it was a giant vampire rock monster. Clearly, Dracula was sick of throwing more and more humanoid vampires at Johnny, so he decided to take a different track. This was a problem though. Johnny couldn't burn it, so he wasn't sure at first how to fight back as the creature smashed its way up Madison Avenue towards the Baxter Building. It bared stony fangs and snapped at Johnny, who veered out of the way, streaking its side with fire to no effect. Holy smokes, he thought. Was it a vampire now too? How'd they even bite this thing? Johnny wondered out loud. It was made of stone. If he couldn't burn it, how could a vampire bite it? The creature swiped at Johnny, missed, and brought its giant pincers down on the street hard enough that manhole covers up and down Madison Avenue flew up into the air like giant spinning coins. And it was at that moment where from the corner of 33rd, Ben Grimm charged into view. "Torch, you just draw trouble wherever you go," he growled. "Vampires ain't bad enough." "This one's a vampire too," Johnny called back as the creature bared stone fangs and snapped at Ben. The thing swatted its jaws to the side and tried to stomp it back into the hole it had made. "Crazy," the thing shouted. "This town's gone to heck in a handbasket since Dracula came along." The monster shook Ben off and tried to spring on him, but for a guy made of rocks, Ben Grimm was fairly nimble. He got out of the way, replying to Johnny saying, "So what are you gonna do about it?" This was a good question. Johnny couldn't burn it, so the best thing they could do was what Ben was trying to do, put it back in its hole and make sure it didn't come out again. The monster snapped at Johnny again as he swooped close, realizing that this time it was too close, and the monster might have gotten him if a taut cable of spider webbing hadn't whipped out of nowhere and pulled its head to the side. "Hey, Torch," Spider-Man called out as he swung into view. "My spidey sense has been tingling like crazy for the last 10 minutes. Now I know why." "You're just in time," Johnny answered as he distracted the monster again by swooping close to its snapping jaws and then narrowly avoided its pincers, which stabbed through the air where he'd just been a second before. "Get some webs on it, Pete. I'm gonna dive under it." "You're gonna do what?" "Easy. Pete gets it hanging over the hole, I get underneath it, then break the webs and help it down into the hole." "From underneath?" "Trust me." Guys, I can't break my webs. They're too strong." "Can I? Don't even remember trying." "Maybe. I'd hate to plan on it, you know." "Yeah, Ben, if you can't break the webs, you can just tear off the part of the building they're stuck to, right?" "Sure, but you forgot one thing. I can't climb like him, the thing said, jutting a rocky thumb at Spider-Man. And I can't fly like you. Johnny glanced over at Spider-Man and saw that P was reaching the same conclusion he was. I think we can work around that. Oh no, I don't wanna. But Spider-Man had already snapped a web onto his back and started swinging him up into the air. More webs followed, binding the monster to the upper corners of buildings on both sides of Park Avenue, so it hung in the middle, half in and half out of the hole it had made. Here was the part where Johnny thought he had to get the monster to stay in one place, and the best way to do that was to offer himself up as bait. So he dove underneath it and the monster pounced, with both of his pincers clamped down on Johnny, not hurting him much but still keeping him pinned down as the monster bared its fangs. And here's around the time where we'd find out if he was right that vampires couldn't bite superheated plasma. Johnny focused and he felt his temperature get hotter, then hotter still, then so hot that the subway tracks and the concrete pillars inside the ruined station started to buckle. Now, Ben! Up above, Ben Grimm tore Spider-Man's webs away from its anchor on the corner of the office tower. Maybe a cubic yard of brick and concrete came with it, tumbling down to crash onto the monster's stone carapace. And at that moment, Johnny's storm went supernova. The vast mass of the stone monster blocked most of the nova blast from surfing upwards and out onto the street. The blast wave radiated downward into the tunnel carved by the stone deviant on its way up from the deep cave where it originated, melting stone along with the reinforced concrete of the subway tunnel. Even with this, the monster couldn't burn, but the shock of the nova blast stunned it and let Johnny break free. He streaked up out of the hole as it collapsed over the monster, which tumbled into the bottomless cavern it had crawled out of just a few minutes before. Molten asphalt, steel, and stone sealed the hole, cooling quickly into a huge pile in the middle of Park Avenue. Ooh, flame off, Johnny thought as he dropped to the street. Ben lowered into view on the end of one of Spider-Man's webs and said, "Oh, come on, this is humiliating. Couldn't have done it without you, Benji." As the thing's feet hit the pavement, Spider-Man swung down and landed next to him. "Pretty neat trick," he said. "Yeah, not bad. All about the teamwork. Whoever heard of a vampire rock monster?" Ben said, looking up at the pit. Then his wonderment was replaced by the typical pessimism. "It might come up again, you know." Johnny looked down at the wreckage, and then up at Park Avenue towards Dracula's castle. "Yeah, this isn't a war we're gonna win tonight, but it is a war we're going to win." The longer he looked at Dracula's castle, the more Johnny imagined he could see Dracula looking back at him, cold and angry at the failure of his latest scheme to extinguish the Human Torch once and for all. And despite how tired he was, he loved it. "Come and get me," he dared the distant vampire lord, "if you've got the guts." Now, immediately picking up on the mystery of just where T'Challa is, we have the Things lore gangs of Yancy Street, where he meets a really mysterious figure in the night. Ever since New York City became locked in a state of eternal night, the members of the Fantastic Four have been working tirelessly to protect the innocent civilians of Manhattan from the vampires who had overtaken the island. Of course, not every civilian was so innocent, and not all of them wanted to be protected. "Go home, you big lug!" a voice shouted from an apartment window. As Ben Grimm, the hero known as the Thing, looked up to see who was shouting at him, he was pelted in the side of the head by a tomato, and then another, each one coming from a different direction. He shouldn't have expected any less. After all, he was on Yancy Street. As the tomatoes' slimy seeds dripped down Ben's stony face, he let out a huge sigh. This was the street he grew up on. It was the first place he had ever felt like he belonged, and yet instead of celebrating him when he became a big-time superhero, the folks in the old neighborhood treated Ben as if he was a sellout. Still, while the kids in the Stan Street gang might have stocked up on overripe fruit and vegetables to hurl every time Ben paid a visit to his home turf, it hadn't deterred the Thing from checking in every day to make sure the people he cared about were safe. "Thanks for the sauce, motherfucker!" Ben yelled to his assailants as he wiped off the pulverized produce. "Next time, could you throw some pasta my way? Maybe a loaf of bread?" "You know damn well you don't need them carbs." "Yeah, well, can't blame a guy trying to get a free bite." "Depends on who they're biting," a third voice yelled. "You see any vamps down there? Tell them the Yancy Street gang ain't no one's dinner." "That's what I'm here to make sure of, you ungrateful punks." As he strolled down the street, everything seemed quiet at first. Ben knew far too well from his many years as a hero that usually meant something bad was about to happen. As usual, his instincts were right on target. As he turned the corner, Ben saw a young boy in the alley next to Kurtzberg's kosher bakery who had been cornered by a vampire. The boy, about the age of Ben's nephew Franklin, looked terrified, but as soon as he saw the Thing around the corner, he tried to put on a brave front.
I told you, lousy fingers, the boy barked. No one messes with the Yancy street gang. We've got friends in high places.
Oh, so now we're friends, Ben joked, deliberately drawing the vampire's attention away from the boy. Good thing, because this big lug always takes care of his own. With that, Ben rushed towards the vampire, pulling his gigantic rocky fist back to deliver a crushing blow. The punch managed to knock the monster's fangs clear out of its mouth, and the wounded vampire clutched at its jaw in pain before fleeing from the alley. The boy breathed a sigh of relief, then puffed up his chest in a show of bravado. Could have handled them myself, you know.
Uh-huh. I'm sure you could have. And I promise I won't tell your fellow hooligans that I lent a hand, but I need you to do me a favor first.
Fine. But just this once.
I've been looking for someone,
Ben stated.
A special friend.
Ain't that sweet? But trust me, no gal in her right mind is looking for a fellow with your busted mug.
Ben glared at the boy, who quickly realized that this wasn't the time for more jokes and insults.
Sorry, bad habit.
The FF, we got a pal who went missing. And when it comes to what happens on the streets of New York, you kids have got better intel than Nick Fury.
That's because we've got more eyes.
True, true. Have any of those eyes seen the Black Panther lurking anywhere around here?
Not exactly, but we've heard whispers that some of the vamps around these parts are answering to a new king. And it ain't the old pasty guy living in that Central Park castle neither.
So Dracula's got some competition for his throne?
That's the rumor at least. And we've got reason to believe it's true. My buddy Stanley went on a supply run into the village yesterday and saw a bunch of fingers all lined up like they were some sort of army. Real organized and disciplined, not all wild and savage like that freak you just clocked in the kisser.
And where'd your buddy see him?
Not too far from here, over in Washington Square Park.
Thanks, kid,
Ben said, patting the boy on the shoulder with his massive stone hand.
You're one of the good ones.
Wish I could say the same, the boy said with a wink before running out of the alley towards the safety of his apartment building. Ben couldn't help but chuckle, but he knew things were about to get a whole lot less amusing. When Ben reached Washington Square Park, he was shocked to discover that the young Yancy street gang member had been telling the truth. There, in the center of the park, was a group of vampires all practicing fighting moves as if they were running military training exercises, and Ben had seen their combat style countless times before. These were the same ferocious attacks employed in battle by the Black Panther himself. Normally, if Ben had come across a gathering of vampires this big, he would have rushed into the park with his fists flying. But this time around, he wasn't looking for a fight, he was looking for a friend. So instead, he watched the vampires complete their training exercise and followed them as they marched back into a seemingly abandoned building. Once the vampires were inside, Ben knew it was time to make his move, so he knocked gently on the door. When there was no answer, he shrugged and knocked it right off the hinges with a single punch, and at that moment, the vampires within immediately turned towards the door and rushed towards Ben with their fangs all bared.
Easy, fellas,
Ben said, pushing his way through the hungry horde.
I just came to talk to your boss.
No one sees the king.
Tonight,
a booming voice said from the shadows,
we shall make an exception.
The vampires backed away from the thing, clearing a path as a majestic figure stepped into the light, clad in ornate white armor that had the heads of fearsome beasts carved into each shoulder. As Ben had hoped, he found himself face to face with his lost ally, the Black Panther. But Ben knew T'Challa well enough that he could instantly see something was wrong. The king's eyes glowed red, and his teeth were unusually sharp. Somehow, Ben realized the vampires must have gotten to T'Challa and turned him into one of their own.
What a revolting development this is,
Ben said as he gazed at his old friend.
Indeed,
T'Challa replied.
I had come from my intergalactic empire to cure this reality of the plague that has befallen it. I soon found myself to be its next victim. While I was able to survive my initial encounter with the Lord of Vampires, I had to go into hiding until I was sure I could control the hunger that had overcome me. You should have just come to us. Susie makes one hell of a brisket. I could not risk putting my closest allies in danger, and much to my surprise, I was not alone for long. For some reason, I was able to exert my command over the other vampires I encountered. Soon I had amassed a small army of loyal followers. Once a king, always a king, Ben mused. Must be in the blood. No pun intended. Actually, it seems my blood is no different than any other vampire. The power once granted to me by my heart-shaped herb has all but faded. I am but a shadow of my former self without it. Too bad. That fancy herb of yours ain't exactly something we can get at the local grocer. Does Wakanda make deliveries? I have lost communication with my empire, T'Challa said, reaching into a pouch hidden in his armor. But I did bring one heart-shaped herb with me on this journey. Then what the heck are you waiting for? It was my hope to give this sample to your teammate Reed Richards in order to synthesize a cure for vampirism. We can always find a way to get more herbs, but you can't be replaced. I'm sure Stretcher would agree. I suppose you are right, T'Challa said, gazing at the herb in his hand, which gave off a gentle purple glow. T'Challa took a deep breath, put the heart-shaped herb in his mouth, and began to chew on its leaves. In mere moments, his eyes began to return to normal, and his fangs began to retract. The curse that had fallen T'Challa was being undone, but the herb had another side effect as well. The vampires around T'Challa all began to sniff at the air wildly, as if searching for the source of something delicious. I feared this would happen, T'Challa said, as his own army suddenly began to turn against him. Dracula suggested that the herb made my blood irresistible to his kind. Then give me some of it, Your Highness, and let me handle the rest. But I have told you, I do not have another herb. Don't need it. All I want is your blood. Tuh. Hopefully not as bad as they do. T'Challa pulled back the armored sleeve covering his forearm, unsheathing the razor-sharp claws on his opposite hand, and he didn't even hesitate as he drew them across his exposed flesh. Blood began to run from the flesh wound, trickling down onto the thing below. Gotta admit I preferred the tomatoes, Ben said, as the Wakandan king's blood coated his rocky hide. But if it's your blood these jerks are after, I'll give them what they want. The vampires instantly forgot about T'Challa, who was hiding safely out of reach above them, and turned their frenzied bloodlust onto the thing. They frantically tried to sink their teeth into Ben, but failed to puncture his rocky exterior. Sorry kids, Ben said. I may be sweet on the inside, but on the outside, I'm just as tough as I look. As the vampires chipped their fangs on the thing's stony hide, T'Challa called down to his ally. These vampires may seem like the enemy, but they were turned to darkness by Dracula just as I was. They served me loyally and harmed no innocents under my command. Despite their current state, I implore you to show them mercy. Mercy? Ben said with a tinge of disappointment. But it was almost clobbering time. Instead of attacking the vampires directly, Ben honored T'Challa's request and hit the ground as hard as he could. The impact sent a powerful shockwave cascading across the floor of the building, knocking all the vampires temporarily unconscious. Oopsie, Ben said as the entire building began to shake around them. We gotta get out of here, T'Challa. We cannot leave them behind. You won't have to, a voice said from the doorway. It was Reed Richards, brilliant scientist, fearless adventurer, and Ben's teammate in the Fantastic Four. Fancy seeing you here, Stretcho, Ben said to his best friend, but I ain't complaining. When you didn't return from your patrol, I followed your personal locator beacon here, and I brought something special with me just in case you ran into trouble. Reed extended his arm to show Ben a strange high-tech device. Please tell me that's some sort of anti-vampire ray. No. I recognize that from the designs my sister showed me. It is a miniature version of the Timestream reintegration device, is it not? Correct. And while it only had limited success during its first test run, I've made some adjustments that may prove useful. Less talking, more doing! As chunks of debris began to rain down on him and the unconscious vampires, Reed activated the portable TRD and the entire room began to glow. Suddenly, the building began to reassemble itself, as if the damage to the structure that the thing caused had never occurred. It is as if the device is rewinding time itself. Well, how about that? Ben added as he watched in awe. Gotta bring along one of those doohickeys next time I fight the Hulk. I am afraid the effects were stronger than you intended, T'Challa said, suddenly grimacing in pain. My hunger has returned. I have been restored to my vampiric state. Ain't that a kick in the pants, Ben said. But if you're back to being a vampire again, what did the TRD do to your loyal royal subjects? Ben, Reed, and T'Challa turned to see what was once a room full of bloodthirsty vampires was now a room full of ordinary people. They were disoriented and confused, but they were grateful to be human again. You have saved him, and now it's time I save you, T'Challa. Thank you. There is no one in this universe, or any other, that I trust more to do the job. Ben looked at T'Challa in utter disbelief. After all we've been through? Yeesh, what's a guy gotta do to finally get a little bit of respect?